Pascuzzo to the stage to talk to us about the life and career of Robert Muir Graves.
Good morning, everyone. And happy Veterans Day. I think it's apropos that we're talking about Bob Graves today. Normally we'll see golf course architect here in the Bay Area for decades, but he was also a Navy veteran and served as in the Korean War, and then spent a couple decades as a Navy reservist. So it seems poetic in some ways to be talking about him today. Restart the slides, please. Okay, I guess I'm not seeing them up here. I have a clicker. There we go. This way. Okay, that works. Some things never change, by the way. I've been a member for 40 years, and, you know. All right. I'm just going to look at the screen. I got to know Bob Graves. He hired me, and I don't know whether he hired me or I tricked him, but it was 1982, and I worked with him for 21 years until his passing in 2003. But I think to really understand Bob Graves' design philosophy and his design style, you have to begin with him in college. He started out at Michigan State. In his third year of landscape architecture school, his professor started looking at the design work he was doing and said, "Bob, if that's the kind of work you want to do, you probably need to be in California." And so he did. He left and he came out here to Cal Berkeley to finish his degree. And why that's important is because who was out here at the time? Legendary landscape architects like Thomas Church had been here for a few decades before. Garrett Eckbo had taught at Cal for a while. Robert Royston, many others, and they were guys that were shunning neoclassicism in landscape architecture. They were going a more modern direction and creating what became termed the California style. And that was the university environment that he went into. I also think we have to consider the era that he was finishing college and beginning his professional practice. Is that Bob was born during the Depression. He grew up through that. He went through World War II, as did millions of other people, defeating both Japan and Germany during World War II. America was feeling pretty good. Everybody was looking forward. It was an era of modernism. And I think, not to get too deep into this, but some of the technologies and things that were developed to help win the war now translated into everyday life to make it new and modern and easier. And so I think that culture of the late 50s also had an impact on his design style. Everybody was looking forward. Nobody was looking backward at that time. I mean, these are my opinions, by the way. I'm not a historian. So in that era, in that culture, I would say, he started his own practice. And I find it interesting that after he left college, he never got a paycheck from an employer. He had started his own practice as a landscape, other than the U.S. Navy. But he had started his practice as a landscape architect and transitioned into golf course architecture, having never worked for anybody else. His first golf course was Blackberry Farm, just down the road here in Cupertino. As he was starting his practice as a landscape architect in '56, he was doing his first golf course in '59. He told me many times that he reached out to other golf architects of that era, and nobody would return a phone call because they didn't want the competition. So you can see how our attitude professionally has changed so radically since that era. So he was really kind of learning on his own. By the way, Blackberry Farm is still in existence and operation. His two big commissions in the early 60s were Lake Merced Country Club and Carmel Valley, or now known as Quail Lodge, I believe, in the Monterey area. And what was particularly interesting about Lake Merced and why he won the commission was that, and this diagram that he did back in the 60s shows it. They talked to many architects, but he was the only one that was going to come in and keep the corridors that they had. Everybody else wanted to change the golf course to an east-west orientation, and he wanted to keep it in the north-south, save as many trees as they could, use as many of the corridors that they could, as they lost some acreage to the freeway. And that got him, he always told me that's what got him the job. There's a couple of photos here of Lake Merced from the early 70s. I think the shapes we're seeing here in the bunkers and in the greens really reflected what was there that he was working from. I don't believe he came in here and imparted a whole new style to this. I think he took what was there and played off with it. But you can tell from, these are the trees in the 70s, you can imagine what they're like now. The trees and the topography are such a critical part of that golf course that had they blown it up and rerouted the golf course, that would have all been lost. I think that in the 60s, he's got a few more commissions, large commissions. He was doing remodeling work all over the place at that time, but large commissions. But I think in the mid 60s to late 60s is when he really started to develop his own style. I call it the organic style. Bob put it simply one time. He was sending a shaper over to Malaysia to work on one of his projects, and as only Bob could do, he got it down to a very succinct phrase. He told the shaper, he said, no straight lines and no flat spaces. So he wanted things moving all the time. He loved how mounds would blend into the greens, and you can see that in his work, how those mounds projected into the greens. His greens were very curvilinear. His fairways were, this is Port Ludlow up in Washington. His greens, his fairways, everything had movement in it, even his tees. And in later years, he and I had pretty good discussions about square rectangular tees versus these organic freeform tees. But that's where I think it was in that late 60s where his style really started to emerge, and he loved working in the Pacific Northwest. He was a tree guy, there's no doubt about it. And he loved carving golf courses out of the forests up there. One of the interesting things he did, you can see a little bit of it in this photo here, is that there'd be these massive Douglas fir stumps that would be left as they started clearing the trees. And instead of pulling them out, he just left them. And he would leave them in fairways. He would leave them on the side of fairways. This one is on the edge of the lake. And there's even a couple of occasions where they flipped this stump over to expose its root ball. And they hosed it off, and he loved the intricacy of the root system of these massive fir trees. And I'm talking 8, 10, 12 feet in diameter. He loved that, the artistic look of that. And so they left them like that. So they have these tipped over stumps along the golf course. Never seen that before. So we can see it here. On the left side is a greens drawing from Big Canyon Country Club. Again, one of his early works from the mid 60s. Might be a little hard to distinguish, but man, that green has got so many curves just in the perimeter. And if you look at the contours, there's nothing that isn't moving. And that was the style that he started to work from. I also think it's interesting to note that he worked at 10 scale on these greens drawings. Those things were monstrous, you know. Blackview Ranch photo on the right, I had a chance to restore his work there and put back in the Cape and Bay bunkers that he would often use. And I honestly don't know if he coined that term, Cape and Bay, or somebody else did, but that was his style. In the 70s, he got an opportunity to do something very, very different, and that was the Sea Ranch Golf Links. It's on the coast of California. From here, it's about 3 hours straight up the coast on Highway 1. And he told me many times that when he was approached by Oceanic California, who was the developer to do the project, he said, what are you looking for? And they said, do as little as possible. Do as little dirt as possible, have as little impact or footprint on the golf course as possible. Which is sort of the theme of the entire development of the Sea Ranch. If any of you have been there, you know what I'm talking about. It was planned by Lawrence Halpern, the famous landscape architect. William Turnbull was an architect who did many of the structures. Both of them lived there for many, actually, Bob Graves had a house there too. They all loved the place so much, they stayed there for many, many years. While the first 9 holes only had 1 hole even close to the ocean, I have seen routing plans that would have been absolutely glorious. It was 18 holes routed up and down the coastline and all the residential inland from there. And that, unfortunately, never got built. But I think you can see, even in what I'll call a low-profile design situation, look at the movement in the bunkers and in the greens. It occurred in the putting surfaces too. It's a little hard to tell in these slides, but he had vertical movement also. I think, again, I'm not a great golf historian, but I think 1971, 1972, this had to be the first or one of the first examples of a natural or lake-style golf course on the West Coast. And if anybody knows of anything earlier, I'd love to hear about it. Just another quick look, you can get a little glimpse of the Turnbull architecture in the back. So from 1982, what a great year that was, to 2003 was really a period of growth and change. When I started with him in 1982, it was Bob and myself and a secretary in a single wide trailer on his farm in Walnut Creek. The family had raised horses and a few other things, and we had it's really idyllic for a guy who grew up in LA. It's idyllic to come to work every day and be surrounded by horses and trees. And the office was actually in one of the paddocks for the horses. It was not uncommon to see a horse nuzzling right outside your window. It's quite amazing. We started experiencing better projects with bigger budgets. His work moved into Japan and Europe. He had already done some work in Malaysia, done I think 3 courses in East Malaysia early in his career, and he's also started teaching along with Jeff Cornish a lot of regional events for the Golf Course Superintendents Association. He and Jeff were sort of fixtures at the national meeting, teaching there, and then they got invited to teach at the Harvard Graduate School of Design in the summer, which they did for I think 16 years. And if you knew Jeff Cornish and Bob Graves, you'll understand this. Their little teaching ritual at the end of the 3-day seminar was to go to the faculty club at Harvard for drinks and dinner. And that was their little reward to themselves, their little tradition. I always thought that was really quite lovely. Bob and I became partners in 1991. Some of the work that was done in this era was the Institute in Morgan Hill, Indian Pond La Purísima, which is also known as La Piranha, if any of you have been down there on the central coast of California, and then some work on the east coast at Indian Pond and the Ranch Golf Club. So all of this work was done very much with the principles that Bob had laid out. The staff had gone from the 3 of us in 1982 to about 12 of us by 1990. And Bob was a very generous guy in terms of allowing the design associates to express themselves. He loved nothing more than having somebody, one of the guys, myself, Les, anybody, Neil, put their work up on the wall, and we all got to critique it. And I think that was just very generous to me. It's something that he didn't have to do. It could have been a very top-down type of organization, but he was very much into giving people some freedom and helping them grow as designers. And when he screwed up and he made a mistake, he was actually pretty forgiving. His last project, I think there's probably some poetic symmetry to his career, because his last project was like his first one. He did a 9-hole executive course in Redmond, Oregon. Not too far from his ranch. He retired to a ranch up in Central Oregon in about 1994, and was doing very little design work at that point. But he had a chance to do this little project with his 2 old buddies. Richard Page, who was a legendary shaper. Some of you may have worked with him, and or one of his 5 million kids that are in the golf business, and Dick Schmidt, a longtime golf course superintendent. They did this little course in Redmond, and it was like getting the band back together. And it was really a perfect project for him to end his career on. He and Jeff had just finished writing this book about classic golf holes, and that's what he based the design of this golf course on. They did 9 classic green styles that you could find around the world. A couple things that Bob always would talk about. He was probably best known in all of his seminars, and certainly around the office, for hammering us on the 3 Ps: playability, practicality, and pulchritude. And then he would quickly add, pulchritude is just